handy saddlebag, and a quick-stop racing brake.
Can I have your autograph, ma'am?
Sure, partner.
Your holographic image of a black hole did the trick.
They took our toys, our weird snacks, and the magic glow of Saturday mornings, and we never even noticed them slipping away. What happened to the wild, untamed world that 1970s kids couldn't live without? Simon was not just a toy. It was a glowing memory test disguised as a game. When it was released in 1978, nothing else looked or felt like it. A black plastic disc with 4 glowing quadrants, red, green, blue, and yellow, it dared you to follow its sequence. And with each round, it got faster, more intense, more impossible. Kids gathered in basements and bedrooms, fingers trembling above the buttons, desperate to keep up with the hypnotic pattern. The sounds were etched into memory: high, low, sharp, hollow. Each note meant triumph or failure. Losing meant watching that smug little light flash mockingly while your friends laughed or groaned. But beating a high score? That was legendary. There was no screen, no joystick, just lights, sounds, and your ability to focus like a laser. In a world that often felt loud and chaotic, Simon forced you into silence, into pure attention. And for that moment, you were in control. You were brilliant. You were winning. It was like mastering a secret code no adult could understand. Simon was not just a game you played. It was a game that judged you. And in the late 1970s, that was the closest most kids got to feeling like they were living in the future. If you grew up in the 1970s, the Atari 2600 was more than just a machine. It was a revolution. Released in 1977, it looked like something from a spaceship with its wood grain panel and chunky switches. But once you plugged it in and inserted a cartridge, everything changed. Pong, Missile Command, Space Invaders, these games turned your television into a battlefield, a racetrack, or a galaxy far, far away. It was not just about playing. It was about being inside the game. You became the paddle, the ship, the pixelated hero. The joystick was awkward and stiff, but it gave you power, real power. Before Atari, play was physical, outside with balls, bikes, or board games. After Atari, play became immersive. You could lose hours in those blinking, buzzing worlds. You could lose yourself. Parents worried, teachers warned, but kids knew better. They felt something shifting, a new kind of play, a new kind of escape. Video games were not just mindless distractions. They were portals, and Atari was the key. It changed what it meant to be a kid. It made your house feel infinite, and whether you were dodging aliens or chasing high scores, you were part of the first generation to hold a digital future in your hands. Stretch Armstrong was every kid's first lesson in pushing limits. At first glance, he looked like an ordinary blonde-haired action figure in wrestling trunks. But once you grabbed his arms and started pulling, the magic began. Stretch could extend over 3 feet and still return to his original shape. And that blew kids' minds. In a decade filled with rigid plastic toys, Stretch was soft, heavy, and squishy. A living stress ball you could battle, bend, and battle again. Every child who had one eventually asked the same question: how far can he go before he breaks? Some froze him, some boiled him, some tied him to door handles and pulled. Most Stretch Armstrongs met tragic ends, with oozy red gel leaking out like a horror movie. But it was all part of the experience. He was a science experiment you could hug. And even if he only lasted a summer, the memory stayed. He was not just a toy. He was a challenge, an obsession. And for many 1970s kids, Stretch Armstrong was the first thing they ever tested to destruction just to see what would happen. That weird, heavy feeling in your hands, that was resilience. That was curiosity. That was pure childhood. Only in the 1970s could a rock become a celebrity. The pet rock craze of 1975 was so absurd it made sense. For just under $4, you could buy a smooth gray stone nestled in a cardboard box with breathing holes and a care manual. It had no eyes, no mouth, no tricks, and kids adored it. Why? Maybe because it was funny, maybe because it was simple, or maybe, deep down, It was because even the most ordinary thing could feel special with enough imagination. Children gave their pet rocks names, personalities, backstories. They were carried in pockets, introduced to friends, given beds made from shoeboxes. Some kids genuinely believed their rock understood them. It never talked back. It never judged. It just was. And in a world of flashing toys and plastic noise, the pet rock was oddly peaceful. A quiet rebellion against doing too much, against always needing more. It reminded kids that anything could be a toy if you loved it enough. The pet rock was not a gimmick. It was a mirror. It showed how much kids could create out of nothing. And somehow, that silly little stone became one of the most unforgettable fads in history. No child in the 1970s felt cooler than when riding a big wheel. With its huge front wheel, low-riding plastic seat, and bright colors, it looked like a race car designed by a kid, because it basically was. Once you hopped on and pushed those plastic pedals, you were not just moving, you were flying. Sidewalks became speedways, driveways became danger zones, and every slope was a dare. The sound of the wheels grinding on concrete was a soundtrack of summer. Every kid knew how to drift, how to slam the brake and spin out in a glorious slide that made you feel like a stuntman. Scraped knees were badges of honor. Big wheels were not built to last, but that only made you ride harder. They cracked, they faded. But while they worked, they were unstoppable. Parents loved them because they were safe. Kids loved them because they felt anything but. Riding a big wheel gave you that first taste of rebellion. You could go fast, steer wild, and race your friends with nothing between you and the road but a thin piece of plastic. It was freedom on three wheels, and for many 1970s kids, it was their first vehicle and their first addiction to speed. The Nerf ball was not just a toy, it was permission. Permission to throw, jump, chase, and tackle indoors without worrying about broken windows or bruised siblings. When it launched in 1969, it quietly revolutionized playtime in the 1970s. This soft, squishy ball, usually bright orange or yellow, was more than foam. It was freedom. For kids stuck indoors during rainy days or cold winters, the Nerf ball turned living rooms into stadiums. It was tossed down hallways, bounced off walls, smacked off ceilings, and it never hurt anyone. That was its genius. It let kids be rowdy without consequences. No one had to yell, "Not in the house," anymore. Suddenly, tag became dodgeball. A lazy Sunday became a full-blown game of catch, and for many kids, it was the first time a ball felt safe. It was something even little siblings could join in on. Parents accepted it, teachers tolerated it, kids lived for it. The Nerf ball was not flashy. It did not talk or light up. But it had this perfect bounce, this perfect softness, and it never failed to make playtime better. In a world full of do not touch, Nerf was the one thing kids were always allowed to grab and throw as hard as they could. There was something sacred about turning off the lights and flipping on a light breet. Suddenly, your bedroom transformed into a tiny, glowing studio. With each colored peg you pressed into the black screen, magic happened. Reds, blues, greens, and yellows lit up like little fireworks trapped in plastic. Introduced in the late 1960s but beloved through the 1970s, Light Bright was not loud. It did not move or speak, but it taught kids something powerful: how to make beauty, one dot at a time. You started with a blank template or maybe a paper guide with letters, but over time, you stopped using instructions. You made your own stars, your own hearts, your own masterpieces. It was slow, patient, personal. The warmth of the bulb inside hummed beneath your fingers. You could feel the light, not just see it. Sometimes you messed up, pulled out the wrong peg. It did not matter. You just kept building, fixing, creating, and when you finally stepped back and saw your little glowing creation, it felt like pride. Not toy pride, real pride. Because you did that. Light Bright made every child an artist. And in a world of noise and chaos, it offered a quiet glow of control, creativity, and calm. The Easy Bake Oven was not a toy. It was a rite of passage, a small, pastel-colored appliance that turned powdered mix into warm, edible cake using nothing but a light bulb. And somehow, that tiny miracle made you feel like a real chef. It was introduced earlier, but by the 1970s, every kid wanted one. Boys, girls, it did not matter. The Easy Bake Oven was your ticket to independence. You measured, you mixed, you waited. That soft hum of the bulb heating up your mini metal pan was suspense in its purest form. Would it bake right? Would it burn? Would Mom let you make another? The cakes were not good. They were dry, crumbly, and oddly sweet. But no one cared, because they were yours. You did not help Mom. You did not watch someone else. You baked it. That mattered. It was messy. It was thrilling. It was a small slice of adulthood you could claim all for yourself. And every time you opened that tiny oven door and pulled out a crooked, half-baked cupcake, you were not just making dessert. You were making memories. You were learning to take pride in the process, even when the result was barely edible. Barbie in the 1970s was more than plastic. She was a portal, a way to imagine what life could look like if the world were just a little more pink, a little more perfect. Kids did not just play with Barbie, they lived with her. She had outfits for every occasion. Dream houses with elevators, cars with glittering wheels. She could be a doctor, an astronaut, a fashion model, a veterinarian, all before you had even picked a major. Her world was one where nothing felt too big to dream. And for a generation of girls, and more than a few boys, Barbie was proof that you could be glamorous and powerful at the same time. You could give her stories, drama, triumph, romance, heartbreak. You could change her hair, swap her clothes, reinvent her life in one afternoon. Barbie taught kids to narrate, to imagine, to believe that reinvention was normal. And even when her legs got loose or her hair went frizzy, you still loved her, because she had been there. She had danced across your carpet, ridden in your bike basket, and laid beside you on nights you were too afraid to sleep alone. Barbie was never just a doll. She was you, just with a better wardrobe. Micronauts were not household names like G.I. Joe or Star Wars toys, but for the kids who loved them, they were everything. Small, strange, and endlessly customizable, Micronauts were the science fiction building blocks of your imagination. Released in the late 1970s, they came with magnetic limbs, clear plastic torsos, interchangeable armor, and ships you could take apart and reconfigure 100 different ways. There was no show at first, no comic book, just you and your mind filling in the gaps. What planet did they come from? What powers did they have? It did not matter. You decided. The Micronauts were yours. One day they were heroes. The next, they were villains. Their limbs could pop off. Their vehicles turned into bases, walkers, or weapons. They were not just action figures. They were tools for storytelling. And every kid who had a handful knew the thrill of inventing whole galaxies on the living room floor. While other toys had scripts, Micronauts had potential. They invited you to build the adventure, not just follow it. They were futuristic, weird, and wild, and that made them unforgettable. In a time before everything came with instructions, Micronauts handed you the pieces and whispered, "Go create." Sesame Street was not just a television show. It was the first place where kids saw their world reflected back in bright colors and warm voices. Premiering in 1969 but defining childhood through the 1970s, it took learning and made it joyful, silly, and deeply human. The show blended puppets with real people, laughter with lessons, and music with meaning. Where else could you find a giant yellow bird, a grumpy green trash can dweller, and a count who taught you math by laughing? For kids growing up in uncertain times, Sesame Street was a steady friend. It taught numbers and letters, sure, but it also taught kindness, empathy, and how to exist in a world full of different faces and feelings. It was playful, but it never talked down to you. It made you feel smart, capable, seen. And in a world where grown-ups often brushed kids aside, Sesame Street looked you in the eyes and said, "You matter." It made television personal. It turned characters like Elmo, Cookie Monster, and Grover into lifelong companions. And it was not afraid to get serious, talking about loss, identity, and family in ways that stuck. For an entire generation, learning started not in school, but on a stoop at 123 Sesame Street. There was something magical about a Saturday morning where math and grammar danced across your screen to a killer beat. Schoolhouse Rock was the rare mix of educational and unforgettable. Launched in the early 1970s, these animated shorts played during cartoon blocks, slipping in lessons between episodes of superheroes and slapstick. But they did not feel like school. They felt like music videos made just for kids, catchy, colorful, and endlessly clever. Conjunction Junction, I'm Just a Bill, 3 is a magic number. These were not just songs. They were memory hooks, hooks that stayed with you for life. Even now, adults who grew up in that era can still sing every word. That is how deep it went. That is how much it mattered. Schoolhouse Rock did not just teach facts, it taught confidence. You could walk into class knowing what an adverb was, not because of your teacher, but because a cartoon train told you so. And you believed it. It gave kids ownership of knowledge. It made learning feel cool. In a time before digital everything, it was one of the first shows to prove that entertainment could be smart without being boring. It was a soundtrack to childhood that made your brain sing. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was not flashy. It had no lasers, no puppets doing pratfalls, no catchy jingles, but it had something better, genuine warmth. Fred Rogers, with his cardigan sweater and calm voice, welcomed every child as if they were the most important person in the world. And to many, he was the only adult who ever did. Debuting in 1968 but shaping hearts well into the 1970s, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood was slow, simple, and radical in its kindness. It was not a show you watched for action. It was a show you watched to feel safe. Fred Rogers talked about emotions, anger, sadness, fear, and he did it without blinking. He told you it was okay to feel, that you were not alone, that being a child was hard, and that your feelings mattered. There was no pressure to be funny or smart or fast. You just had to be yourself. That was enough. The land of make-believe added whimsy, but it was always grounded in care. Mr. Rogers did not perform for you. He spoke to you, and that made all the difference. For many kids, his neighborhood was not just a television set, it was a sanctuary. A quiet reminder that love could be gentle, and that you were loved just by being you. If Sesame Street was your preschool best friend, the Electric Company was your cool older sibling. Airing in the 1970s, it was wild, fast-paced, and just a little bit chaotic in the best way. It taught reading through sketches, songs, animations, and goofy superheroes who shouted phonics like they were battle cries. It was loud, it was weird, and it was impossible to forget. With a cast that included Morgan Freeman and Rita Moreno, the Electric Company did not talk down to kids, it pulled them up. It made reading feel like something urgent, something fun, something that could change the world. You did not just sit back and watch, you joined in. You sounded out words with them. You felt like part of the team. It blurred the line between learning and entertainment. It showed that intelligence and humor were not opposites. They were partners. And for kids who felt bored or left behind in school, the Electric Company gave them a way in, a way to laugh and learn at the same time. It was messy and magical, full of wordplay and wonder, and it proved that even the alphabet could be electric. H.R. Pufnstuf was like opening a children's storybook that had somehow exploded onto your television screen. It was colorful, chaotic, and completely unlike anything else on the air. Premiering in 1969 but reigning throughout the early 1970s, it featured a dragon mayor talking trees, witches, and a boy named Jimmy who got stranded on a magical island. And every episode felt like a fever dream you wanted to revisit. The puppets were huge and bizarre. The sets looked like candy-coated acid trips, and for kids used to more grounded shows, H.R. Pufnstuf felt like stepping into another dimension. But beneath the strangeness, there was heart. Each episode had lessons, about friendship, trust, bravery, but wrapped in surreal layers of fantasy. It was imaginative in the most unfiltered way. It did not ask permission to be weird, it just was. And you either jumped on board or missed out entirely. For kids who felt different, this was a show that said, weird is wonderful. It gave permission to dream big, to be strange, to laugh at the absurd. It was chaotic and clumsy, but always sincere. H.R. Pufnstuf was not just television. It was an invitation to believe in something a little more magical than the world around you. Before the Marvel Cinematic Universe, before endless superhero reboots, there were the Super Friends, a team of caped crusaders who met at the Hall of Justice every Saturday morning to fight crime and teach morals along the way. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, all voiced with booming authority and unwavering goodness. It was not about grit, it was about greatness. The animation was stiff, the stories were simple, but that did not matter. To 1970s kids, this was the Justice League. This was how you learned right from wrong. Every episode ended with a lesson, a reminder to share, to be brave, to tell the truth. The villains were rarely scary. What mattered was how the heroes responded, with courage, teamwork, and always a plan. Super Friends made you believe in justice, not as an abstract concept, but as something you could live out. On the playground, in your house, in your heart. It was not just fantasy, it was a moral compass, and those heroic theme songs still live somewhere in the back of every grown-up's mind. It made you believe that heroes were real, and that maybe, just maybe, you could be one too. The Brady Bunch was a family like no other, and yet it felt like everyone's family. 6 kids, 2 parents, and a house full of laughter, chaos, and pastel-colored drama. Premiering in 1969, but becoming a cultural mainstay throughout the 1970s, it was pure television comfort food. Every episode ended with a smile, a hug, and a catchy lesson on sharing, honesty, or sibling rivalry. It was not edgy. It was not deep. But it was warm. And for kids whose homes were not always so perfect, the Brady Bunch offered a glimpse of what harmony could look like, even if it was idealized. Mike and Carol never yelled. Alice the housekeeper always had a one-liner ready. And the kids? They were just messy enough to be real. You picked a favorite. You sang along with the theme song. You quoted Jan's iconic "Marcia, Marcia, Marcia." It was pop culture innocence. A time capsule of bell-bottoms, perms, and avocado-colored kitchens. And even if you rolled your eyes at the cheese, deep down you loved that family, because they showed that even the most blended bunch could belong. And that felt revolutionary in its own gentle way. The Muppet Show was barely controlled chaos, and that was exactly the point. Hosted by the endlessly stressed Kermit the Frog, it brought puppets and celebrities together in a late-night variety show that aired in prime time but captured the hearts of kids everywhere. Launched in 1976, it was not just a puppet show, it was the Puppet Show. Gonzo, Miss Piggy, Fozzie Bear, Animal. These were not background characters, they were stars. The sketches were wacky, the musical numbers were weird. And the jokes, they were sometimes just a little over your head. But you laughed anyway, because the Muppets were alive. They bickered, they loved, they failed spectacularly, and that made them feel human. It was beautiful chaos, held together by heart and felt. For many kids, it was their first taste of satire, of theater, of performance, and it stuck. It felt like a secret shared between generations. Kids laughed at the slapstick, adults smiled at the subtext. The Muppet Show was fun, yes, but it was also oddly emotional. These puppets had dreams. They wanted applause, and watching them chase that, week after week, made you want to chase your own. Mood rings promised to reveal your soul with nothing but heat-sensitive liquid and a silver band. They hit stores in the 1970s and immediately became a cultural phenomenon. Kids were obsessed. What color was yours? Blue meant calm. Green meant normal. Black meant, well, probably nothing good. But did the colors really reflect your emotions? Of course not. Still, that did not matter. It felt like magic. like your feelings were finally visible, like someone could see how you felt without you having to explain it. And in a decade where kids were just starting to explore self-expression, that meant something. Mood rings were not flashy. They were not expensive. But they made you feel seen. Like a tiny piece of jewelry could make sense of the chaos in your chest. You wore it to school. You compared with friends. You checked it constantly. Not because it worked, but because you wanted it to. It became part of your identity. And even though you knew deep down it was just science reacting to body temperature, you believed the story. That was the power of being a kid in the 1970s. You let the world be strange and beautiful and just a little bit magical. Bell-bottom jeans were not just fashion. They were rebellion stitched in denim. Wide-legged and loud, they turned every hallway into a runway and every walk into a statement. By the mid-1970s, if your jeans did not flare at the bottom, you were not keeping up. These pants were a symbol, a sign that you were part of something, part of the cool kids, the disco kids, the rock and roll dreamers. Bell-bottoms flowed. They danced when you moved. They made you feel older, bolder, somehow freer. And even though your parents might have rolled their eyes, they could not deny their popularity. You got them in every color, sometimes with patches, sometimes with glitter thread. You wore them with platform shoes, fringe jackets, or whatever your local mall had on sale. They were ridiculous and perfect. Bell-bottoms said you were not just a kid anymore. You were growing up. You were trying things. You were choosing what you looked like for the first time. And maybe that is why they stuck. They were more than fabric. They were freedom at the ankles. A little reminder that style, like youth, should never be quiet. Tube socks with stripes were more than just something to keep your feet warm. They were a fashion flag. Knee-high, usually white, with bold bands of red, blue, green, or gold stretched just below the knee, they were worn with pride. In the 1970s, no kid stepped onto the blacktop without a pair. Whether you were heading to gym class, riding your big wheel, or just running wild in the backyard, those stripes meant something. They said you had style. They said you were paying attention. Everyone had them. Boys, girls, teens, even cartoon characters on TV. They peeked out from under corduroy shorts and polyester tracksuits, puffed slightly at the top, like tiny banners of youth. They were equal parts sporty and silly. The way they slouched, the way they matched your t-shirt or clashed on purpose, it all became part of your look. And for a generation growing up in a whirlwind of trends and transitions, tube socks were a stable staple. You might have changed haircuts, hobbies, or heroes, but your socks? Those stayed striped. They were cozy, cheap, and iconic. Even today, one glimpse of those stretchy stripes is enough to take you straight back to wood-paneled basements, dodgeball courts, and the pure joy of being a kid with loud socks and no worries. Banana seat bicycles were not just a way to get around, they were your first real taste of freedom. Long, cushioned, and often wild in color, that seat made your bike look like a chopper. Paired with high-rise handlebars and a sissy bar in the back, it transformed an ordinary ride into a full-blown cruising machine. You did not just pedal, you posed. You leaned back like a rebel. You waved at neighbors like a parade grand marshal. The seat could fit two if you were daring, or at least your younger sibling for a slow ride around the block. The best ones had glitter in the vinyl, or maybe streamers on the handles, a squeaky horn, and that unforgettable whirring sound of playing cards clipped to the spokes. That bike was not a toy, it was a badge. A banana seat bike meant independence. You could go to the corner store, visit friends, or just ride until the street signs looked unfamiliar. And your parents let you. That freedom, the wind in your face, the wobble of the front wheel, the feeling of owning the road, that was childhood distilled. You rode it hard, parked it proudly, and never forgot the day it gave you your first taste of the world beyond your block. Opening a metal lunchbox in the 1970s was like opening a little shrine to your personality. These boxes were not just containers, they were statements. With bold prints of your favorite cartoon, superhero, or television family splashed across both sides, they turned every lunch table into a showroom. Scooby-Doo, The $6 Million Man, The Bionic Woman, Star Wars. You were not just eating bologna sandwiches and apple slices, you were showing the world what you loved. That matching thermos inside, often with the same artwork and a leaky cap, was the crown jewel. The metal clanked when you walked, dented easily, and sometimes rusted if you forgot it outside, but none of that mattered. These boxes were portable pop culture. They made lunchtime feel personal. There was a ritual to opening them. The slow unclick of the latch, the hiss of the thermos lid, the smell of peanut butter mixing with the faint scent of metal and childhood. Kids compared boxes like trading cards. Sometimes you would outgrow the show on the front, but you would still carry the box, like a memory you were not ready to give up. In a world without cell phones or backpacks full of gadgets, that metal lunchbox was everything, and it never left your side. Trapper Keepers were the crown jewel of school supplies. You did not just buy one, you chose it, like a sword from a stone. With wild neon covers, fantasy artwork, or bold geometric patterns, they stood out in every classroom. The Velcro flap made that satisfying rip each time you opened it, and inside were your secrets. Doodles, notes, gum wrappers, math homework barely hanging on. They were designed to keep your folders and papers organized, but they did more than that. They made you feel cool, grown up, in control of your chaotic school life. Everyone wanted one, and everyone customized theirs with stickers, marker doodles, and penciled-in crushes. The sound of opening a Trapper Keeper was like a school bell for your soul. It was not just about staying neat. It was about expressing yourself. Before laptops and tablets, this was your home base, your portable brain. You zipped it open during study hall, passed notes from it during lunch, and carried it like a briefcase of dreams. You learned to file things, to hide things, to value your own organization. And even when the corners got frayed and the Velcro stopped sticking, you kept it. Because that Trapper Keeper held more than papers, it held your entire school year identity. Scratch and sniff stickers were tiny treasures that made school days feel like magic. Each one was a scented surprise, a burst of artificial but addictive smells trapped in glossy sticker form. Root beer, grape, pizza, bubble gum. You scratched, sniffed, and shared. Sometimes you even traded. For kids in the 1970s, these were more than stickers, they were currency. A row of them on your notebook or folder was like a badge of honor. Teachers used them as rewards, which only made them more valuable. Some smelled great, others, not so much. But that was half the fun. You never knew what you were going to get. One whiff and you were either in heaven or recoiling in horror with your friends laughing beside you. They made the classroom feel less like a chore and more like a game. Collecting them became an obsession. There were sticker albums, boxes under beds, secret trades made during recess. You might not remember what you learned that week, but you definitely remember the way a watermelon sticker smelled, or how excited you felt when you got a glittery one. Scratch and sniff stickers were pure scented joy, proof that even the smallest things could leave the biggest memories. Mixtapes were handwritten love letters wrapped in cassette cases. You waited by the radio for hours just to hit record at the perfect moment, trying to catch the start of your favorite song without the DJ talking over it. You rewound, replayed, and carefully curated the perfect order so each track melted into the next. Some were made for crushes, others for best friends. Some were sorry tapes, and some were just because. Each one had a theme, a purpose, and a heart behind it. You picked songs that said what you could not. Then you labeled the tape in your best handwriting, maybe decorated the case, and handed it over like it was treasure. Because it was. A great mixtape took hours, sometimes days, to get just right. And when someone gave you one, you listened to it until the tape wore thin and the sound warped. Mixtapes were not just music. They were memories, feelings, time capsules wrapped in magnetic ribbon. And long after the songs faded, you remembered the person who made it, their handwriting, their choices, their message. Even now, in a world of playlists, nothing hits quite like the soft click of a tape deck and a song you once recorded just for someone else. Blank VHS tapes were not just empty plastic boxes. They were treasure chests, the kind you could label, relabel, and fill up with your own little corner of television history. You remember the sound, right? That whirring click as the VCR accepted your latest recording project, whether it was The Muppet Show, a Disney movie airing on Saturday night, or just some random commercials you ended up watching later like they were rare artifacts. Back then, taping something off television was serious business. You had to time it perfectly, hit record at just the right moment, or risk catching the tail end of a news anchor saying, "And now," before your show started. Fast-forwarding past commercials felt like a power move. Rewinding? An art form. And if you had one of those little tape rewinder machines shaped like a car, you were basically living in luxury. You wrote on those little white stickers with a level of care that rivaled school projects. Do not tape over. Disney only. Toys R Us ad. Keep forever. And when someone in the house recorded over your stuff with a football game, that was war. But if you wanted to really test your patience and your brain power, there was only one screen-based challenge that ruled them all. In the 1970s, you could walk into any living room and find a macrame plant hanger swaying near the window. Handmade from twisted cords, thick yarn, or even old rope, these hangers were more than decoration. They were statements. Your mom or aunt probably made one at a craft night or picked one up at a flea market. They cradled ferns, spider plants, and anything green, sometimes hanging over orange shag carpeting or wood-paneled walls. Some had beads woven into the strands. Others had patterns that seemed to hypnotize you if you stared too long. They were often hung with a brass hook screwed right into the ceiling, dangerously close to ceiling fans or light fixtures. But no one cared. It was groovy. It was artistic. It was freedom and nature brought indoors. The macrame craze represented a return to earthiness and personal touch. You were not just buying a product, you were tying every knot yourself. And if you were not making one, someone you knew definitely was. These hangers aged, gathered dust, sometimes sagged under too much weight, but they were beloved. They matched the houseplants perfectly and brought warmth into every room. Seeing one today might feel like stepping into your grandmother's sunroom on a quiet afternoon, the scent of potting soil and lemon-scented furniture polish in the air. Stirrup pants were the 1980s attempt to combine fashion with function, and they did neither particularly well. These leggings had a strap that looped under your foot, supposedly to keep them from riding up. In reality, they pulled awkwardly at your ankles, made your feet sweat, and caused socks to bunch in weird places. But we wore them anyway. They came in bright colors, bold patterns, and every synthetic material known to mankind. They were stretchy, shiny, and often paired with oversized sweaters or blazers that made no logical sense. From the knees up, you looked like a school principal. From the knees down, you looked like a gymnast caught mid-warm-up. But stirrup pants had their moment. They were the go-to outfit for school picture day, mall trips, or just feeling like you belonged in a fashion catalog. The loop under the foot made you feel oddly secure, like your pants were holding onto you. Sure, they sagged in weird places. Sure, they made your calves look like sausages. But they were a staple, loved, mocked, and deeply missed. For anyone who wore them, stirrup pants were more than a fashion choice. They were a commitment, a stretch of spandex, and a rite of passage. Speak and Spell. A name so simple, you almost forget just how advanced it felt. This little orange learning machine had a robotic voice that felt both comforting and unsettling at the same time. The keys were rubbery. The screen was a small LED display. And the second it powered on, you felt like a kid genius. This was not just a toy, it was a computer. At least to us it was. And for a lot of people, it was the first time they ever heard a machine talk to them like a teacher would. It would ask you to spell elephant or photograph in that slow, mechanical voice. If you got it wrong, it would buzz like you had just activated some kind of self-destruct sequence. And if you nailed it, that same robotic voice gave you praise like it meant something, like it knew you. Speak and Spell was part game, part lesson, and 100% magic. You did not need Wi-Fi. You did not need batteries half the time. All you needed was the imagination to believe that this talking toy was the smartest machine in the house. And sometimes, it probably was. Of course, intelligence was one thing, but style? That was another story. If you were the kid with this next item, everyone knew you had your life together. Giant scrunchies were not just hair ties, they were statements. Big, bold, and often made of velvet or shiny satin, they wrapped around ponytails like fabric donuts. One was never enough. Some girls stacked them. Others coordinated them with earrings, shirts, or shoelaces. You might even wear one on your wrist, just in case your hair needed managing at a moment's notice. They came in every color of the rainbow and every pattern imaginable. Leopard print? Check. Neon green? Of course. Polka dots the size of your thumb? Why not? Scrunchies were soft, gentle on your hair, and perfect for the sky-high ponytails the 1980s demanded. Some had sequins, some had bows. All of them made your hair look like it was ready to host a party. You could spot a scrunchie from across the school cafeteria. It bounced when you walked and made even the messiest bun look intentional. Looking back, they seem oversized and silly, but that was the point. Scrunchies were playful, practical, and loud in the best possible way. And even though they disappeared for a while, anyone who wore one back then knows you never really outgrow the joy of tossing your hair into a cloud of fabric. Public service announcements in the 1980s were something else. You would be watching cartoons or a sitcom, then suddenly, boom. The screen would cut to a gray filter, eerie music, and a serious voice saying, "This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs." Or a crash dummy flying through a windshield, or a puppet warning you not to talk to strangers. They were dramatic, unsettling, and weirdly unforgettable. One minute you were giggling at Garfield. The next you were wondering if touching a light socket would make you disappear forever. These announcements were designed to scare you straight. And they worked. They haunted your dreams and followed you into adulthood. Some used animation. Some used real actors with tear-streaked cheeks and slow zooms. And all of them felt like they were speaking directly to you. But even with the ominous tones, there was something strangely comforting about them. Like the world was trying to look out for you, even if it scared you a little. They were a strange part of growing up, and honestly, we would be lying if we said we did not remember them word for word. Still, if there was one thing that really balanced it all out, it was the glory of waking up at sunrise for the lineup of legends. Playgrounds used to be a little more dangerous, and the metal slide on asphalt was the crown jewel of poor design. In the 1970s, nearly every school or park had one. It stood tall, often 2 stories high, baking in the sun until it could sear the back of your legs. No shade, no padding, just you, gravity, and a prayer. The steps up were made of thin metal bars. The top had no real guardrails, and when you slid down, you hit that blacktop like a dropped steak. But we lined up for it anyway, over and over. There was something thrilling about the danger. It was a rite of passage, a fast, hot, jolting ride that ended in a dusty scrape or bruised elbow. Teachers watched from afar. Parents shrugged. Kids were expected to bounce back. If you made it to the bottom without a scream, you earned bragging rights. If you got burned, you wore it like a badge. Safety standards have come a long way since then, but so much of that fearless, feral childhood play was tied to moments like these. Today, it is hard to believe we once thought that was normal, but deep down, part of us misses it. Neon everything was not a trend. It was a takeover. Shirts, socks, shoelaces, scrunchies. If it could be worn, it could be neon. Bright pinks, electric greens, yellows so vivid they could stop traffic. Walk into a classroom in the 1980s, and you might see a dozen students glowing like highlighters. It was not subtle, it was not sophisticated, but it was unforgettable. Neon made sure you were seen from across the street, or the roller rink. Entire outfits were built around one blinding shade. And the braver kids, they mixed them. A neon blue shirt with neon orange shorts and lime green shoelaces. Why not? Matching was optional. Visibility was everything. Neon told the world you were loud, proud, and unbothered by what anyone else thought. It showed up in birthday parties, aerobics tapes, and mall photo booths. Looking back now, it seems like a color explosion. But that was the magic. Neon was confidence in color form. It was youth, amplified. It was chaos, celebrated. And for those who wore it without a hint of irony, it was the brightest part of a decade that refused to dim. The peachy folder was like a social billboard. Everyone had one. Those tan or yellow folders with athletes printed in faded ink on the front, football players mid-tackle, baseball players mid-swing. They were meant to be neutral, practical, but they never stayed that way. Because the moment that folder landed on your desk, it became a war zone of doodles, lightning bolts, band logos, stencils, flames, hearts with names inside them, graffiti letters that took 15 tries to get right. Every inch of it became your personal art gallery or battlefield. These things aged like ancient relics by the time June came around. It did not matter how boring the class was. Your peachy folder made sure you had something to focus on, something to claim. And if a substitute teacher tried to take it away, that was a declaration of war. Of course, personal style extended beyond the page, because it was not just about what you carried. It was about what you wore. And in the 1980s, you had better know how to roll your jeans or risk social exile. The kitchen of the 1970s did not just serve food, it made a statement. And that statement was harvest gold and avocado green. These two colors dominated every American kitchen appliance. Your refrigerator, your stove, even your blender wore these colors like a uniform. It was not just paint, it was identity. These colors were supposed to represent nature, health, and a touch of luxury. Harvest gold had a warm golden glow that felt like sunlight. Avocado green was earthy and bold, a perfect match for the indoor plant movement and natural fiber craze of the time. But somewhere along the way, the trend turned into a punchline. Yet, for those who lived it, there is no forgetting. You remember the heavy click of the fridge door, the way the green surface reflected your face in the oven window, the hum of the blender making root beer floats. These were not sleek or modern. They were sturdy, reliable, and filled with the smells of Sunday dinners and burnt toast. Maybe you were not fond of these colors as a kid. Maybe you even hated them. But when you see them now, something deep inside stirs. They are more than colors. They are the palette of your childhood. Shoulder pads were not just a trend, they were a transformation. You could put on a blazer and suddenly feel like a corporate warrior, even if you were just headed to homeroom. The goal was to look powerful, confident, and vaguely like a football player on a job interview. From business suits to casual blouses, shoulder pads invaded every piece of clothing in the 1980s. You could not escape them. They were sewn in, velcroed on, or added as an afterthought to make your silhouette scream important. The bigger the pad, the better. Entire generations walked around with squared-off shoulders and structured poise, looking ready to charge into a boardroom or a runway. Some tried to remove them only to realize the entire shirt deflated without the padding. They were ridiculous, and we knew it. But they worked. You stood a little taller, felt a little braver, and if someone bumped into you in the hallway, your outfit absorbed the blow. Looking back now, they seem comically oversized, but at the time, they were armor, fashion armor. And for anyone who wore them, they were a reminder that style was not just about looking good, it was about looking like you meant business. You had not lived until you beat the Oregon Trail without dying of dysentery. That was the holy grail of 1980s computer gaming. Those chunky gray computers in the school lab, that pixelated map, that relentless text box reminding you that little Timothy had broken a leg and your oxen just drowned crossing a river. Iconic. It was not just a game, it was survival. You learned real-life lessons in that pixel wilderness, like how much meat you could carry back from a hunt, not much, or why you should never try to ford a river without thinking it through. And somehow, we were totally into it. The green and black graphics, the clunky keyboard, the fact that it felt like schoolwork but kind of fun. You would all huddle around one screen, a group of 5 kids making group decisions like mini pioneers, and somehow it felt like the fate of your wagon family actually mattered. It was your first taste of choices in gaming, your first little moral dilemmas. Do you trade clothing for bullets? Do you rest for 2 days? Or do you push on and risk everyone freezing to death? Still, once the school bell rang, it was game over. And if you wanted to know what was playing in theaters that weekend, you did not Google it. You picked up the phone. Tang was not just a drink. It was a symbol of the future. Pitched as the beverage astronauts drank in space, this orange-powdered miracle made you feel like you were participating in the space race from your own kitchen. Every kid wanted Tang. Every mom kept a jar in the cupboard. All you needed was water and a spoon, and suddenly you were sipping the same stuff that orbited the Earth. It was sweet, artificial, and packed with flavor. And it made you feel cool. The powder never fully dissolved, which meant gritty sips near the end were just part of the experience. If you got the scoop size right, you earned that perfect bright orange glow. Too much, and it was syrupy sludge. Too little, and it was just sad orange water. Tang was more than a drink, it was a cultural event. The jar was wide and squat with a screw-on lid, and every household seemed to have one. Kids felt proud making it on their own. No adult needed. It became the go-to for lunch, after school, and Saturday cartoons. You never questioned the science behind it. You just knew that if it was good enough for NASA, it was good enough for you. That dusty scoop brought the cosmos into your kitchen. Mall food court hangouts were not about the food, they were about freedom. Teenagers in the 1980s treated the mall like their second home, wandering its air-conditioned halls with nothing but pocket change and big plans to do absolutely nothing. The food court was the epicenter. Tables filled with cliques, couples, and groups of giggling friends stretched out time between slices of greasy pizza and soft pretzels. One soda could last hours, especially when refills were free. You scoped out crushes, eavesdropped on drama, and occasionally made eye contact with someone cool enough to nod back. Parents dropped you off and picked you up hours later, trusting the mall to act like a babysitter with bright lights and security guards. Whether you sat near the arcade or tucked into the corner by Orange Julius, the food court was a social stage. It was loud, it was messy, and it felt like your world. Every weekend brought the same faces, the same greasy trays, and the same comforting rhythm of adolescent independence. No one talked about it like it was special, but for those who grew up there, it was the perfect mix of noise, neon, and growing up in public. Owning a Trapper Keeper in the 1980s felt like owning a briefcase made just for kids, but with neon colors, Velcro, and personality. These were not just folders. These were statements. You did not just store your homework in a Trapper Keeper. You stored your identity. From bold geometric designs to wild illustrations of race cars, dolphins, or laser grids that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie, the outside of your Trapper Keeper said something about you. And that satisfying rip of the Velcro? That was music. It had pockets for pencils, slots for notes, compartments you never used but felt cooler just knowing they were there. There was something so absurdly organized about them that it made you want to turn your life into a schedule. You would write the dates on your notebook dividers, color-code your subjects, and then forget all of it by Wednesday. But hey, the effort was there. You felt important carrying one around. It made you feel like you were growing up, and even if you never opened it for anything other than doodling weird cartoons during math class, it still felt like a win. But when it came to keeping track of things, there was one object that really made you feel like a collector, and not just of stuff, but of memories. They were not just for carrying sandwiches and juice boxes. They were badges of honor. In the 1970s, metal lunchboxes with cartoon characters were everything to a kid. You marched into school like you owned the place if you had the Brady Bunch, Scooby-Doo, or Fat Albert slung over your arm. They clanged when you walked, chipped when you dropped them, and smelled like peanut butter forever. But they were yours. The thermos inside matched the design, with a plastic cup that screwed on top and often leaked just enough milk to give the lunchbox that signature sour scent. You would line them up on the windowsill during class or hide secret notes inside the lid. The paint would eventually chip, the latches would rust, but you never wanted to give it up. Today, they have been replaced by soft-sided, logo-free lunch carriers. But for those who grew up in that era, seeing one again brings back the sound of the bell, the taste of a bologna sandwich, and that magical feeling of opening your box and hoping you got a Hostess cupcake instead of raisins. They were loud, proud, and deeply personal. One glance at the dented metal, and the memories rush back like a school bell in September. Over-the-top hairdos in the 1980s were less about style and more about spectacle. To get that perfect towering poof or side-swept shell, you needed a can of hairspray in one hand and a teasing comb in the other. Some mornings, the bathroom turned into a construction site. Hair was sprayed, scrunched, fluffed, and frozen into place like a sculpture that dared not move. Mousse was slathered on like sunscreen, followed by heat from a curling iron so hot it could leave permanent dents in your bangs. It was a daily battle between gravity and vanity usually won. The bigger the hair, the closer to cool. Class photos from the decade show clouds of bangs, mile-high ponytails, and helmets of blonde that could survive a wind tunnel. Everyone walked around smelling faintly of aerosol. Some kids were practically flammable, but at the time, it was worth it. You judged your popularity by the size of your bangs. A flat head was social suicide. Looking back now, it seems absurd, but for those who lived it, there was no higher compliment than being told your hair looked totally rad. Made-for-television movies in the 1980s were not just filler. They were events. Whole nights were planned around them. When that promo would come on, this Sunday, only on ABC, you would perk up, lean in, and make mental notes to not miss it. This was before DVR, before pause buttons. You missed it? You missed it. These movies had titles like The Day After, V, The Final Battle, or The Ewok Adventure. Some were tearjerkers, some were thrillers, some were straight-up terrifying. And they had you glued to the screen, wondering how they managed to squeeze so much drama into 2 hours. Plus, commercials. Families would make popcorn, dim the lights, and treat it like it was an actual premiere. You watched it live together, and you talked about it the next day at school. Because chances were, everyone saw it too. They hit different. The music, the narration, even that grainy picture. It all added to the mood. You were not just watching. You were part of something. And right in the middle of those movies came the strange intermissions, ones that could go from innocent to haunting in 5 seconds flat. Mood rings promised to read your soul. Slip one on, and suddenly your finger was a window into your emotions. Or so we thought. The magic came from a tiny, color-changing stone set into a thick metal or plastic band. It shifted hues depending on temperature, but as kids, we believed it told the truth. If it turned blue, you were calm. If it went black, you were angry. Green? Maybe in love. We studied those little charts that came with the ring like they were sacred scrolls. Every recess and sleepover had at least one person interpreting moods. Sure, the science was sketchy, and sure, it mostly just reflected how cold or hot your hands were, but to us, it was real magic. It felt like the ring knew something we did not. Every kid had one, lost one, or begged their parents to buy one from a gas station or gift shop. The band turned your finger green eventually, but you wore it anyway. It was a talisman, a tiny crystal mood detector that let you feel seen, even if it was just a gimmick. To this day, nothing quite compares to the mystery and wonder packed into one shimmering, shifting little stone. Mood rings promised to read your soul. Slip one on, and suddenly your finger was a window into your emotions. Or so we thought. The magic came from a tiny, color-changing stone set into a thick metal or plastic band. It shifted hues depending on temperature, but as kids, we believed it told the truth. If it turned blue, you were calm. If it went black, you were angry. Green? Maybe in love. We studied those little charts that came with the ring like they were sacred scrolls. Every recess and sleepover had at least one person interpreting moods. Sure, the science was sketchy, and sure, it mostly just reflected how cold or hot your hands were, but to us, it was real magic. It felt like the ring knew something we did not. Every kid had one, lost one, or begged their parents to buy one from a gas station or gift shop. The band turned your finger green eventually, but you wore it anyway. It was a talisman, a tiny crystal mood detector that let you feel seen, even if it was just a gimmick. To this day, nothing quite compares to the mystery and wonder packed into one shimmering, shifting little stone. Mood rings promised to read your soul. Slip one on, and suddenly your finger was a window into your emotions. Or so we thought. The magic came from a tiny, color-changing stone set into a thick metal or plastic band. It shifted hues depending on temperature, but as kids, we believed it told the truth. If it turned blue, you were calm. If it went black, you were angry. Green? Maybe in love. We studied those little charts that came with the ring like they were sacred scrolls. Every recess and sleepover had at least one person interpreting moods. Sure, the science was sketchy, and sure, it mostly just reflected how cold or hot your hands were, but to us, it was real magic. It felt like the ring knew something we did not. Every kid had one, lost one, or begged their parents to buy one from a gas station or gift shop. The band turned your finger green eventually, but you wore it anyway. It was a talisman, a tiny crystal mood detector that let you feel seen, even if it was just a gimmick. To this day, nothing quite compares to the mystery and wonder packed into one shimmering, shifting little stone. If this took you back, drop a memory in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more forgotten magic.